All right, let's just jump right in. Picture this. It's late 1939. Europe is basically a powder keg about to blow. And way up north, in the freezing, dark forests of Finland, one of the most unbelievable conflicts in history is about to kick off. We're talking about a tiny nation going up against a colossal superpower in what would become one of the coldest winters anyone had ever seen. And when I say unbelievable, I am not kidding. Just look at these numbers. The Soviet Red Army rolls in with almost 500,000 soldiers, thousands of tanks, a huge air force. I mean, the works. And Finland? Well, they managed to pull together about 300,000 troops, but they had just 32 tanks. 32, and a little over 100 planes. This was never supposed to be a fair fight. On paper, it looked more like a swift execution.
But the Finns had a secret weapon, their own backyard. See, they were absolute masters of winter warfare. While the invaders were going to struggle in the cold, these Finnish soldiers, dressed in all white, could move like ghosts through the snow and trees. They were ready to fight for every single inch of their homeland.
So, this brings us to the million-dollar question, right? How on earth did they do it? How did a country of only 4 million people not just survive an invasion by a superpower, but actually inflict a deeply humiliating blow on the Red Army?
Well, the answer is a pretty gripping story. It's got geopolitics, conditions that are almost impossible to imagine, and just some incredible, brilliant ingenuity.
So, to really understand this war, we have to understand why it even started. And to do that, you kind of have to get inside the mind of one person in particular, Joseph Stalin. And the key to Stalin's thinking? It's all about geography. Look at this map. Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg, was the Soviet Union's second biggest city, a huge industrial center, and it was only 20 miles from the Finnish border. With Nazi Germany getting more and more powerful, Stalin was just deeply paranoid that Germany could use Finland as a launch pad for an invasion. So for him, this was all about creating a buffer zone, and he was going to get it at any cost. Things started to escalate, and fast. In August 1939, the infamous Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between the Nazis and the Soviets secretly put Finland right in the Soviet sphere of influence. After Germany and the USSR sliced up Poland, Stalin turned his eyes north. He strong-armed the Baltic states into accepting Soviet bases, and then he turned to Finland. The Soviets basically came to the Finns with an ultimatum. They demanded huge pieces of Finnish territory, including the very strategic Karelian Isthmus, and they wanted a naval base right on the Finnish coast. Now, the Finns tried to negotiate, they offered other options, but these demands, they were just impossible. To them, it felt less like a negotiation and more like watching their independence slowly get choked out. So they said no. Okay, so diplomacy didn't work. Stalin needed an excuse to invade. So, what do? His secret police literally shelled a Soviet village near the border, turned around and blamed it on Finland, and then used that incident as the justification to invade just 4 days later. The Winter War was on. The Soviets, they thought this would be a total cakewalk. They honestly expected a victory parade in Helsinki in about 2 weeks. What they got instead was a frozen hell. And the Finns, well, they were about to turn every single one of their disadvantages into a deadly weapon. You have to understand, the winter of 1939 was not a normal winter. It was unbelievably brutal. Temperatures just plummeted to these insane lows. We're talking minus 45 Fahrenheit. That's cold enough to freeze a person solid in minutes. For the Soviet troops who were totally ill-equipped, the cold itself became one of their worst enemies. I mean, the difference in preparation was just night and day. The Finns were dressed for it, moving fast and quiet on skis, using the landscape to their advantage. The Red Army, meanwhile, was often just stuck in these long exposed columns on the few roads that even existed. Thousands of their soldiers got severe frostbite before they ever even fired a shot. And this situation led to one of the most brilliant strategies of the war, Motti tactics. The word Motti literally means a pile of chopped firewood. Think about it. Finnish ski troops would just materialize out of the forest, slice a long Soviet column into smaller, isolated pockets, the Mottis, and then, one by one, they'd just wipe them out. They turned the Red Army's greatest strength, its size, into a fatal flaw. Finland's defiance became legendary, right down to their sense of humor. When the Soviet foreign minister, Molotov, claimed on the radio that they weren't dropping bombs but humanitarian aid, the Finns sarcastically started calling the cluster bombs Molotov breadbaskets. And their fiery response? Well, they invented a makeshift anti-tank weapon out of a glass bottle and some fuel. And you know what they called it? The Molotov cocktail.
Yeah, this quote from a journalist on the ground at the time just says it all. The endless forests, the frozen lakes, the deep, deep snow. The land of Finland itself was maybe the country's greatest soldier.
But let's be realistic. You can't hold back a superpower with sheer guts and clever tactics forever. Stalin was deeply humiliated by how badly things were going. He made a change, and the war was about to enter a new, much bloodier phase.
So here's the turning point. The Red Army, to its credit, learned from its catastrophic mistakes. They brought in a new competent commander, Semyon Timoshenko. They ditched the failing strategy of attacking on all fronts and instead focused all of their power on a single point, the main Finnish defensive line called the Mannerheim Line. And they started to lean on their one true advantage, just overwhelming, massive artillery.
By February of 1940, the sheer weight of Soviet numbers and steel finally became too much to handle. Day after day of nonstop artillery bombardment just pulverized the Finnish defenses. The Finnish army was exhausted, they were running out of ammunition, they were at their breaking point. A peace treaty was now the only way to save their nation from being completely overrun.
So the war officially ended on March 13, 1940. It lasted just 105 days. But its legacy and its incredible cost would go on to shape the entire course of the Second World War.
The human toll was just staggering. The Finns lost terribly, with about 70,000 casualties. But the cost for the Soviet Union was astronomical. We're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 350,000 casualties. They paid a truly unbelievable price in blood for what they considered a victory.
So in the peace treaty, Finland was forced to give up about 9% of its territory. This included their second largest city. It was a really bitter pill to swallow for them. But, and this is the absolute most important part, Finland remained an independent, sovereign country. Unlike its Baltic neighbors, it was never swallowed up by the Soviet Union. And this war had a huge unintended consequence. See, somebody else was watching this whole thing very, very closely from Berlin. Adolf Hitler. And what he saw, this disastrous performance by the Red Army, convinced him that the Soviet military was a joke, a colossus with feet of clay. And that belief directly encouraged him to launch Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, just a year later.
Which leaves us with this final, really tricky question. On paper, the Soviets won. They got the land they wanted. But Finland won an incredible moral victory. It saved its nation, and it exposed the Red Army's weaknesses to the entire world. So it makes you think, who really won the Winter War?